Governments love to say they're fighting for your financial freedom. They promise stability, prosperity, and opportunity. But a look through history reveals a darker reality. Governments have always used subtle financial deceptions to keep ordinary people struggling while concentrating wealth and control at the top. And what's remarkable is that these tactics aren't new. They've been recycled for centuries, rebranded, repackaged, and renamed, but always with the same purpose: to move wealth upward and ensure dependence among the majority. Let's begin with the oldest and simplest deception of all: inflation. When a government spends beyond what it can raise through taxes, it has two choices. It can admit its mistake and increase taxes, politically risky. Or it can quietly debase the currency, reducing the value of every coin and note. Ancient Rome perfected this method. In the 3rd century AD, Roman emperors burdened by military costs began cutting the silver content of the denarius. What once was nearly pure silver became mostly copper, coated with a thin silver veneer. The empire pretended nothing had changed, but the people paid the price. Inflation exploded, savings vanished, and wages lagged far behind. It was a silent tax on the people, a trick that lives on today, now executed through central banks instead of imperial mints. The Middle Ages introduced another version of the con: forced loans. Monarchs in England, France, and Spain regularly requested funds from merchants and guilds. Of course, refusal wasn't an option. Penalties included fines, confiscation, or worse. Promises of repayment were made, but the money often returned late, debased, or not at all. The rulers funded their wars and palaces, merchants were left with losses. The trick was coercion disguised as patriotism, and it worked for generations. By the 17th century, the entire financial system became the mechanism. When Britain created the Bank of England in 1694, it wasn't out of generosity. The crown needed cash for war against France. Wealthy investors bought bonds, and in return received guaranteed interest funded by taxes. Sounds fair, until you ask who paid those taxes: ordinary citizens, through levies on salt, beer, and cloth. The rich lent to the government and earned returns, the poor funded those returns through daily consumption. A wealth transfer, disguised as national finance. That system still dominates today. The safest investment is lending to governments, and those profits are secured by the labor of the masses. Fast forward to modern times, and the tricks persist. Take deficit spending. Governments rack up enormous debts, selling bonds to investors, banks, and foreign powers. They claim it's for infrastructure, jobs, or welfare. Yet much of it flows into military contracts, corporate subsidies, and bailouts. When the bills come due, they don't cut elite spending, they raise taxes, inflate currencies, or slash social programs. The illusion is that the debt helps the people, but the cost falls on their shoulders while profits go to bondholders. Then came bailouts. In 2008, reckless banks gambled on toxic mortgages and nearly crashed the global economy. Who paid? Ordinary taxpayers, through massive rescues. Who profited after? The same banks, bigger and richer than before. The formula: privatize gains, socialize losses. And the people were told it was necessary to save the system. Even pensions and retirement funds are built on illusion. For decades, workers in the US, Britain, and across Europe paid into public systems, trusting the money would be there at retirement. But governments rarely save it. They spend it immediately and leave behind IOUs, promising that future taxpayers will foot the bill. It's a generational Ponzi scheme wrapped in bureaucratic language. It works, until populations age, and suddenly the system collapses. Then comes reform, which always means smaller benefits, delayed retirement, or inflation eroding payouts. The pattern is constant, the trick depends on perception. Inflation becomes growth. Forced loans become patriotism. Debt is rebranded as investment. Bailouts are stability. Pension cuts become reform. Words disguise the truth, wealth moves from the many to the few. It keeps working because most people don't study economic history, don't understand financial systems, and don't see the con until it's too late. In recent decades, the schemes have only grown more sophisticated. Take quantitative easing, a phrase few knew before 2008. Central banks created trillions from nothing to buy bonds and securities, stabilizing markets. And it worked, for the rich. Asset prices soared. Stocks, property, and bonds skyrocketed. But who owns most assets? The wealthy. Ordinary families saw little benefit, only rising costs and distorted markets. The magic trick: create money to protect elites while fueling inflation for everyone else. Then there's stealth taxation. Instead of openly raising income taxes, governments tax quietly through sales taxes, energy levies, and, most powerfully, inflation. When prices climb faster than wages, your lost purchasing power is a hidden tax. Governments love inflation because it shrinks their debts. But for citizens, it destroys savings. You might feel richer because your paycheck is higher, but if costs rise faster, you're poorer. Inflation isn't an accident, it's policy. Another timeless ploy is regulatory capture. Regulations are supposed to protect the public, but powerful industries often shape the rules. From railroads in the 1800s to oil in the 1900s to tech and finance today, corporations influence their regulators. As the Peaky Blinders learned in miniature, it's smarter to own the referee than fight the game. Governments appear protective, but behind the curtain, giants carve loopholes to stifle competition and protect profits. The public sees safety, insiders see control. War finance is an old trick dressed in flags. During both world wars, governments sold bonds as patriotic duty. Citizens believed they were helping their nation, and they were, but the bonds also provided safe profits for the wealthy, guaranteed by future taxes. The same pattern continued in the 21st century, trillions spent on wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, enriching contractors, banks, and investors, while taxpayers carried the debt. Wars end, the financial burden endures for generations. Governments also use complexity as camouflage. Thousands of pages of tax codes, obscure financial instruments, and jargon-packed budgets make it impossible for citizens to trace the money. Complexity hides the theft. In ancient Rome, the trick was visible in debased coins. Today, it's buried in balance sheets filled with acronyms. When the public can't follow the flow, the transfer continues unseen. Why does this matter now? Because the deceptions are not fading, they're accelerating. Inflation eats savings. Debt balloons. Bailouts return at every crisis. Central banks manipulate money supply while governments pass the cost to citizens in ways so indirect few even notice. The result is a system built to keep you working harder for less real wealth while the financial elite tighten control. The lesson of history is clear: the methods change, the outcome doesn't. When Rome debased silver, citizens paid. When monarchs forced loans, merchants suffered. When modern states inflate and borrow, households lose. Different eras, same design. And here's the hard truth: most people will never escape these schemes because they don't realize they exist. They think inflation is natural, taxes inevitable, bailouts merciful. They trust government narratives instead of studying economic history. That ignorance is the most effective trick of all. When people forget the past, they fail to recognize its return. That's why the powerful prefer a financially illiterate public. Knowledge is resistance. Economic history is armor. Understanding the trick makes you harder to deceive. So, what should you do? First, question the narrative. When governments announce stimulus, ask who profits first. When inflation rises, remember, it's not bad luck, it's policy. When new regulations appear, ask who wrote them. Second, build real wealth, assets that hold value even when money loses it. Third, never assume the system works for you just because it claims to. Systems exist to preserve themselves, not you. History doesn't repeat, but if you don't understand it, it will crush you just the same. The financial deceptions that drained Roman citizens are the same ones draining your bank account today, only wrapped in modern language. The only difference is whether you recognize them in time. If this opened your eyes, hit subscribe.